Hi everybody and welcome to the online component of PPO. It's hard to believe that it's already been over a month since I've seen you all, but I'm really looking forward to re-engaging back in this work with you over the next 2 months. I hope that your August has gone well, and I'm looking forward to kind of guiding you through the process in your first semester of working online. So this week we're going to be focusing on a couple of different topics that are definitely interwoven with each other. We're going to be looking at the role of immigration and displacement, and specifically thinking about displacement in two different ways, both displacement of Indigenous folks through the process of colonialization of what we now call North America, and ongoing displacement that occurs because of globalization, capitalism, and colonization that continues to exist today. So we're going to be really looking at how these two sort of topics, or three topics really, are sort of interconnected with each other, and thinking about what are the implications in terms of our work as therapists, either as Indigenous or immigrant or refugee folks, or as settler folks, and thinking about what the power dynamics are across those different shifts, depending on who we're working with and our own experiences of identity as well. So the way that we're going to be doing this, and I want to give you a little bit of an overview because it's the first week that we're going to be doing this, is that every week I'll begin with a video much like this, where I include some practical information, where I give you a little bit of information about upcoming assignments, things to watch out for, as well as if there's anything that I kind of notice that's happening that might be helpful to provide some feedback, either content-wise or structurally in the course, and I'll do that here. And then the other thing that this sort of video piece is really about is it's kind of like a primer before you read. So it's a way to kind of give you an idea of some of the themes or ideas we're going to be tackling this week, some things to watch for as you're consuming the different pieces, because some of them will be art things and some of them will be academic articles. And also if there are current events sort of going on that sort of are relevant and need to be kind of woven in, then I'll also talk about some of those. Knowing that I'm filming these at least a week ahead so that the lead bloggers have time to read them. So there will be things that are happening ahead of me. So hopefully some of that will come out in the blogs. So just to give you a little bit of a reminder of the assignments for this week and to fill you in a little bit on the process, because I know we went over this on Friday afternoon. Some of you were probably at here in terms of content. All of it's written in Blackboard and also written in your syllabus. So if this doesn't make sense orally, then go back to either your notes from that day or take a look at the syllabus. And as always, I'm always available. Please just email me if you have any questions. I promise I'll answer them, and I'm happy to get on the phone or answer them via email as well, if anything's not clear to you. So the first thing that you're going to do is the Hello blog, which is your first assignment. So think about this kind of like the beginning of a group, how you might do a check-in with a group at the beginning. That could be through art making, and or it could be through sort of talking to one another. So it's a practicing of some of the therapeutic pieces where you're really thinking about how are you doing and how have you been since I last saw you. Because this is a course, you're going to be thinking about how are you doing in relationship personally and professionally to some of the topics connected to PPO. How have you been since residency? So what you're going to do is you're going to either create a piece of art, visual, music, dance, whatever, or curate something, but put some thought into it if you're not going to create it. Really pick something that is meaningful to you. You want to pick some kind of piece, and then you're going to give a few sentences to sort of contextualize the art making and give us a little bit of information, or art finding, and give us a little bit of information about why this piece, why it's meaningful to you, and how you've been doing with sort of the topics of PPO since we've seen you last. So that first part, uploading that and giving a couple of sentences up to about a paragraph long, is going to be due on September the 3rd by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the Hello blog section. And then by September 7th, at 11:59 p.m., you're going to be doing a response to, I would invite you to do it to at least two of your folks. I think in the syllabus I say you just have to do it to one, but two would be ideal. You really want to take in what people have been sitting with since you've last seen them, because that'll make the discussion in the blogs that much richer. And you're going to respond with a sentence or two to one or two of those folks to just sort of have some dialogue. So that's the Hello blog piece. And then the lead blogger, who this first week is going to be Crystal, her responsibility is going to be that she's going to read the required readings and the video. There are a bunch of recommended resources. I'll do this every week. Crystal and other lead bloggers, you're not responsible for the recommended readings, but certainly feel free to engage with any of them if there's any that really stick out to you, if you'd like to take a look at them. But Crystal's responsible for reading and consuming all of those pieces. And then kind of like the leading of a conversation if we were having this class in person, what she's going to be doing is looking at some of the common themes, some of the tensions between the topics. How do these sort of pieces work in relationship to each other? Feel free to pull out things that you want to critique, because none of these pieces are perfect. What's missing from the conversation? What's problematic about some of the language or some of the things that you're being taught? And you're going to sort of create, a couple paragraphs worth talking about the main issues connected to. This week will be around indigeneity, immigration, and displacement, sort of the connection between those three. And you're going to pose at least one question to the group. You can pose more than one for them to pick from if you like, but you're going to pose at least one question to the group for the rest of the group to then answer. So the rest of the group, this will be done on Monday night, so September 3rd. The rest of the group will have until Saturday night to respond to Crystal's question. If it's a week with 2 lead bloggers, to respond to each of those lead bloggers' question, which is going to combine both some personal and professional thinking. Show me that you've done the reading, so you need to you don't need to do perfect APA style for the blogs. You won't get marked down on that, but you do need to cite in some way the readings to show to me that you're engaging with the required readings. And in addition to responding to Crystal's original question, you're also going to leave a comment or a question or some kind of feedback to another one of your colleagues' answers. So if you all leave it until Saturday night to start writing your initial response, you're all going to be very hectically trying to read somebody else's. So I recommend you try to space this out as much as you can. Because this is our first time working online together, you want to think about really creating a space where you're opening up dialogue and conversations. You want to think about what you're writing and the tone, so something that might work in real life where you have facial expressions or tone to be able to help you. So sarcasm, for example, does not work very well online unless you're being videotaped. Think about what you're writing. It's totally fine, in fact, encouraged for you to disagree with each other, but you want to make sure you're doing it in a way that's respectful, that opens up conversation. Remember, we talked about calling people in rather than calling them out. And feel free as well to offer other resources or ideas, or to reach out to me if you'd like to. What I'll do as the blog kind of goes on during the week is I'll be paying attention to what's happening, and I'll pepper in some questions or resources, or if something happens in the news, I'll add something in midweek, some resources or pieces that might not have come out yet. So the pieces for this week to really kind of dive us into the circle are really about what is our relationship to land, what is our relationship to citizenship, what is our relationship to place, and how does that connect with our clients' relationship to land, citizenship, and place. And really the sort of thread that ties these pieces together are thinking largely about colonization and the rise of capitalism as sort of our primary mechanism, at least in the United States, of conducting sort of affairs, and how that has kind of taken over the ways in which we interact with one another. So I'm going to start you off with a chapter by Sun Tzu. It's chapter 21 that really is looking at working with clients who have experiences of either being an immigrant or a refugee. It'll give you some information about statistics around, sort of the proportion of folks that have come to the United States, information about some of the laws in the U.S. around immigration and how these have changed over time. So, for example, it will talk about how it was only very recently, 1952, that those who were not white could become naturalized American citizens, and really thinking about what that means given that it was non-white folks, it was indigenous folks who were the originators of this land. And you want to think about, as well as you're reading this, what are some of the best practices that Sun Tzu offer? What are the limitations to some of those best practices that they offer? What are some of the risks of following those too concretely? And also, what are some of the stressors that they point out? What are some of the things that can take a toll when you immigrate to a new country? I want to also sort of pepper in really importantly here that Sue and Sue in this chapter do not really contextualize at all the experience of immigration and citizenship within the history of sort of a colonial history, both historically in terms of what it means for citizenship to even exist on land that was stolen, but also currently there's not a ton of information about why migration is happening. So really the long-lasting impact for much of what is called the global south, so Africa, Asia, Latin America, South America, you know, in terms of the stealing of natural resources and colonization of land that happened, you know, between 500 and 300 years ago, and how that impact that continues in sort of the ways in which corporations and countries continue to occupy spaces that were not originally theirs, and extract natural resources from the land. How that has destroyed many jobs, has created natural disasters, has really decimated populations, relationships, created sort of wars between different groups that weren't there to begin with, that are often the cause of migration that then happens of why folks are needing to leave the land in which they're in. So it's important to note that Sue and Sue really don't give that context at all. So some of the other pieces will take up other parts of this. So you'll see an article written by a researcher who's not a creative arts therapist, but really focuses on the idea of narrative, by a woman named Masson, who does her research primarily working with Syrian refugee participants. And you might want to think here about her work in relationship to the TED Talk. If you've never seen it before, take a look at it, called The Danger of a Single Story by Ndici. And thinking about here about how the categories or even just the title, the word refugee or immigrant or Syria, how those sort of topics can create a kind of idea of essentialism. So one must have experienced this tragic experience that happened this way, and how that can really flatten differences and the heterogeneity of people's experiences depending on what their migration process was like. So what she does do is she does provide a story in a very in-depth way of one person and one person's journey of pre-current migration and post-migration. And she analyzes this story to really be thinking about not only a story of oppression and a story of challenges, but she also sort of tries to break up this idea that things are always necessarily tragic or problematic, and also looks at some of the ways in which this woman in particular has been able to make meaning for herself out of some of these experiences. The next piece that I want you to take a little look at is an article that's written by a group of folks that use both playback theater and theater of the oppressed. I believe you will have been oriented to playback theater during part of your orientation, and theater of the oppressed, we did at least one exercise together. That was the 3 chairs, a table, and the water bottle exercise together during residency. So the Rousseau et al. Article is a group of researchers that are based in Montreal that work with children in schools who are immigrants and refugees. And they use a variety of different art forms to try to help with the stress that comes from acculturation. One of the reasons I'm assigning this article, it's one of few. There's been a recent growth in trying to have some sort of control group and quantitative research that really looks at the impact of the creative arts therapies. I don't think it's necessarily that kind of empiricism is better or worse than other kinds of research, but I think it's important to show you that some of this research exists to try to seek to understand what kind of changes can happen over time. But you also want to think of the limitations. What stories get left out in measuring change in this particular way? What are these researchers valuing, for example? And then in addition to those, I've assigned to you a drama therapist named Rachel Lee Soon, who is indigenous to Hawaii. And she has written a piece that looks at what it would mean to sort of look at the overlap between an indigenous epistemology, and I'm going to explain the word epistemology in just a second, with drama therapy principles and techniques. So epistemology is a fancy word that means way of knowing, or what kind of knowledge matters. So what Rachel does in this piece, or what Soon does in this piece, is that she looks at the history of colonization, specifically for her within the indigenous Hawaiian context, thinks about colonization as a relationship between power and domination, and how it both has historical tenets and continues today, and looks through a drama therapy lens at how ways of knowing that are important within her particular Indigenous community. So she breaks down the concept of aloha, the importance of relationship with each other and relationship to the land, the inseparability of mind and body together, and really thinking about place not in terms of ownership, which is the way that like immigration is typically thought about in terms of citizenship as owning a piece of the land or owning a right to the land, but rather about origin, and so how a place might hold stories and relationship. So she looks at the ways in which an Indigenous epistemology or an Indigenous way of knowing has some overlap with both role theory and developmental transformations in a drama therapy context. And she ends the piece with thinking about drama therapy within a post-colonial paradigm. So how might the drama therapy need to contend with the history of colonization and thinking about indigeneity, but also what might a trauma-informed approach that includes colonization really mean for drama therapists and for clients as well who have either experienced colonization or are, historically colonizers, and what that work might look like. In addition to those articles, there are two brief videos, very brief videos. One of them is a video that is part of the Hamilton mixtape. So I'm sure people have heard of this musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda. There was released last year a additional CD in addition to the original play that took up using sort of like other, outside of just the regular musical genre, that used current artists to create some new pieces inspired by the original Hamilton music. So some of them are remixes and some of them are brand new songs. And so this one is a music video to a line in one of the songs that says, "Immigrants, we get the job done." And it's a new piece that's co-created by four people who have different immigrant and refugee stories. So Kanan, who is a Canadian Somali refugee, Snow Product, who's a Mexican American, Rizmi, who's Riz MC, who is a British Pakistani artist, and Residente, who is a Puerto Rican who moved to the United States mainland. So Puerto Rico, for example, is one of those islands that is part of the United States, but not given voting rights, and experiences ongoing colonization. And we see the difference between those who are really considered good American citizens in terms of the response after a massive hurricane versus those that are seen as second class or not really citizens at all in terms of the lack of response of the United States towards Puerto Rico after that disaster. So this very brief music video, pay attention to some of the lyrics, pay attention to what's happening visually, who is portrayed in this, what kind of stories are portrayed in this, and also what's missing from it. Some of the lyrics are very powerful, talking about immigrants being America's ghostwriters, for example, that the credits are only buried or borrowed, and sort of thinking about which stories do not get highlighted in the media. And the second piece is a series of clips that were done. You may have heard this phrase, there is no illegal on stolen land. So thinking about what is a Native American or Indigenous American's perspective on this sort of topic of illegal immigration. And just as a sort of term piece here, the sort of correct terminology to use is undocumented rather than illegal immigrant, so an undocumented immigrant. And the reason we do this is no human is illegal. So this video really sort of pulls out a bunch of different perspectives on what it means in terms of the immigration debate, in terms of this all happening on land that has been settled and stolen upon from Indigenous folks, and that many of those who are being blocked from land that has been within particular tribes and families for many, many years prior to contact of white Europeans in what we now call North America. In addition to all those pieces, I have included a series of recommended ones. I know there's a lot. It's because we're trying to cover a couple of different things in one week, which you will find me having stressful moments about all the time because there's so much information and I can only give you so much as sort of required readings. But there are a bunch of different pieces for you to take a look at if this is a topic that you know you need to do some work on. So one of them is an article that's written by a dance movement therapist called Pluvirian, which looks at biculturalism. It's an article that's set in Tokyo and sort of looks at biculture identities, how these differ when there's cultural tensions, how that shows up in the body image, gender issues. It's a really interesting article that sort of takes a deeper dive into that. The Schwantes article is written by a music therapist that looks at the role of music in ESL work with kids who are immigrants. It's an example of work that really needs to be critiqued. So you want to think about how are some of these issues framed and also what might be missing. So for example, there's an assumption that kids who are off task, who are ESL, are off task because of language skills. And what that misses is what else might be going on. So if you think about Sue and Sue's chapter, what other stressors might be inhibiting somebody from being able to be on task, but also what do we even mean when we say off task? How does that have a whole bunch of assumptions about how kids are supposed to learn, what a good student is, how education and knowledge is even valued in the first place. So if you think about Rachel Lee Soon's article, knowledge is co-created in relationship with each other and with the land versus a sort of Western banking model of education where teachers hold the information and deposit it into good students who sit still and listen to that information. There's also I told you I was a sucker for poems. There's also a poem by Denise Frohman, who's one of my favorite spoken word artists, called Borders, that talks about her and her mother's experiences in the United States and the immigration experience of her mother. A short PBS video called Forever Foreign, which talks about which immigrants are actually able to become seen as naturalized U.S. citizens that pass as no longer being immigrants, and which, unsurprisingly, those that are racialized because of how these things intersect with each other, which folks are never seen as American no matter how many generations they have been living on particular land, including being here originally. And there are two brief APA sort of sites, one on immigration and one on Indigenous mental health, and thinking about sort of what does the American Psychological Association consider to be both the problems but also best practices in terms of thinking about some of these issues. So I know it's a ton of information, but I think a lot of it is super helpful. Don't feel like you need to do all the recommended ones, but you know if this is a topic that you need more information around, and pick and choose what those will be like for you. I really invite you to take a dive into the work this week. I'm really looking forward to engaging with this information with you online. If you find other useful resources, they can be funny, they can be serious, they can be art-based, or they can be written work that's more academic. Please feel free to share those with your colleagues. We're here to learn together, and I look forward to seeing you all in week 2 and also in the blog space in week 1. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Bye, guys.